With the release of Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, developer From Software returns with Dark Souls director Hidetaka Miyazaki at the helm. It's a new challenge, and the world starts from a fresh slate too, one of shinobi, towering mountains and mythological beasts. But Sekiro is strengthened by a certain lineage to the team's other work. Indeed, it brings the next evolution of the studio's in-house technology only 3 years on from Dark Souls 3. The game has its own identity, but it's fascinating to see its DNA can be traced much further back. There's been a lot of twists and turns since Demon Souls, of course, as released on PlayStation 3 back in 2009. Every entry in the Souls series since, including Bloodborne, acts as a kind of technical milestone up to this point. Lighting, materials, and even bespoke middleware technology are added between each, depending on the game's particular vision. So today we're taking a walk down memory lane. In this video, brought to you by Digital Foundry and Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, I'm going to show the main points that defined every entry in the Soulsborne line. What changed and improved, leading right up to the work going into Sekiro today. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Few will forget the feeling of playing Demon Souls for the first time. Originally seen as an experiment by From Software, due to reception within the company, it was only initially meant for release in Japan. Thanks to positive word of mouth though, it did eventually find a cult following in the West, spurred on by the importer community, and the rest is history. Going back today, it's clear to see why this worked. A mysterious world of Boletaria awaited anyone willing to give it a try, of dragon-besieged bridges and haunted asylums. Inspired by the fighting fantasy roleplay series, every step oozed atmosphere. Sure, the visuals are relatively simple by today's standards, but as a PS3 exclusive, it forged a template that still stands the test of time. Technically speaking, Demon Souls threw a lot against the wall to see what stuck. A major focus at From Software, for one, was on the physics system used across its world. Making use of PS3's Cell processor opened the gates to some impressive real-time interactions at the time, notably on body ragdoll physics after downing an enemy. Cleave an enemy down, and they suddenly become weightless and rubber-like, spinning on the spot or flying across the floor. Sure, it looks a little excessive today, but it added a certain charm to the game, a bit of comic relief. Destruction physics, as provided by Havoc, also play a huge part in the world building. Dangling chains react realistically when running past, while crates and wagons smash to tiny pieces if you roll through them. Often, it even works as a gameplay mechanic, where hidden enemies smash through for a surprise attack. Really, it was a much needed addition to the engine, seeing as so many levels are built on rigid stone walls. This physics interplay makes the world feel tangible in some way. From Software's gamble paid off, and this laid out a guiding principle for fleshing out the worlds in later Souls games. Demon Souls' art direction holds up wonderfully, but it has clear limits when viewed through a modern lens. With no PC release and sadly no remaster, PS3 is still the only way to play it. Footage here is served at a native 1280x720 as a result, running as it is with limited anti-aliasing. As you might expect, it exhibits a 30fps cap with uneven frame pacing, and plenty of drops underneath once alpha effects fill the screen. With all that said, there are some high points to its visual design, notably in its lighting model. A post-effect suite adds lens flare to the sun. In dark interiors, your character casts ambient light onto nearby geometry, while outside, a heavy bloom effect runs over the Stonefang stage, giving it a hazy sun-bleached appearance. All combined, it was simple but effective. Of course, later games would go on to bolster many aspects of the engine. Part of this is down to it being the first game of its type on PS3. Textures often use very low resolution assets and rarely with any complex shader work. Geometry too is very simplistic compared to what would follow even in Dark Souls. Meanwhile, dynamic shadows apply to only characters, whereas environment shadows are baked in. Plenty of room for improvement then. But today, Demon Souls is a fascinating case study, and often, sadly, overlooked in the discourse surrounding the Souls series. It's a precursor, but one that laid much of the groundwork for the great things to come. Running under the codename Project Dark, the 2-year wait was well worth it. From Software developed a spiritual successor to Demon Souls, but with a twist. Dark Souls offered a completely continuous world to explore, rather than the individual zones of its predecessor. Level streaming was a crucial focus for the game, and informed much of its design from the start. So rather than use a hub to link you to different areas, we now had a connected world that could be played, with exceptions, from start to finish without any loading screens. It was a bold move. Bolder still, development moved to both PS3 and Xbox 360 this time. But to make such an open-ended design work cross-platform, optimizations had to be made. As well as upgrading its in-house engine, the team's use of third-party tech grew with Dark Souls. Notably, a popular middleware solution known as Simplygon helped the team simplify the process of making lower polygon assets. For such a huge world to stream in seamlessly, LOD transitions had to be created. Here, Simplygon reduces mesh complexity across the environment, cutting polygon counts on details that, often, are too far away to spot. As a console game first, it proved key to working around the limited RAM on 360 and PS3. Factor in the 1024x720 native resolutions on each, and those LOD changes really don't notice. But it was a crucial move to realizing this open world concept. The macro scale is impressive, but Dark Souls also made huge strides in its micro detail. Per object motion blur was added to weapon strikes. Every spot in Lordran also uses higher resolution normal maps for brick, moss and woodbark. Materials are sharper, and shaders for metal also get upgraded to reflect passing light on armor. Even enemies like the Great Wolf Sif use first shaders more freely, a so-called first shell, that brought console frame rates to their knees at the time. Compared to Demon Souls, the level of detail on terrain takes a huge leap too. Bricks jut from the ground, and the Undead Berg is replete with moss and grass. The effect is of a denser, far richer world to explore. As for the physics, well, Havoc's engine returns for destruction and cloth. Look close though and you'll see character animation is vastly upgraded compared to Demon Souls. A form of inverse kinematics is added to From's engine this time. If we flash to Demon Souls, walking upstairs cues a scripted stepping animation, causing the entire body to bob up and down with each step. From Dark Souls onwards though, character legs adjust dynamically to each step and adapt to every incline. An extra calculation is run on the character model, meaning legs move independently of the torso, which stays balanced. It made a huge difference given the verticality of Lordran's world in places, a far more natural style of movement. Dark Souls remains a masterpiece, but it had clear issues if you're a PC user. A remaster did come out 7 years later, bringing its own upgrades, which is what you see here running at 4K. But back in 2012, the PC version was produced in a limited time frame, only letting users run at 30 FPS with the resolution fixed to 1024x720, the same as console. Thankfully, this new edition finally addresses it, and while the settings are limited compared to later Souls ports, it has a few neat extras. A temporal anti-aliasing mode is added to the existing FXAA, while lighting compared to the original is improved. A new fog effect was added, and we also saw the introduction of swaying foliage, although this stays unaffected by player movement, a change we won't see until Sekiro. One of the most fascinating chapters in the Souls story, Dark Souls 2 famously went off the beaten path. Designed without the aid of series director Hidetaka Miyazaki, who was at the time working on Bloodborne for next gen, it kept a similar interconnected world style to Dark Souls. There were major changes to its tech though, and this is where we see a branch in the path. Here the team decided to discard the engine and build everything afresh with a focus on photorealistic lighting. Deferred rendering was used, while materials had physically based rendering in mind. Uniquely, it's the only game in the Souls series to also be built with cross-gen support from the start, ambitiously putting one foot in the aging PS3 and 360 territory and the other on PS4 and Xbox One. Now, Dark Souls 2 never matched the style of early trailer footage. Early capture showed a darker aesthetic, with dynamic lighting working as the gameplay mechanic. What we got instead, in its own way, is still fascinating and still features dynamic shadows as a carryover from that vision. Havoc physics work a little differently too. While enemies fall dynamically as you'd expect, the post-death physics on corpses of the first game are missing, and so running past you just clip straight through them. Then again, cloth simulation gets a stronger emphasis in Dark Souls 2 all round, with many more cases of swaying cloaks and garments on bosses. All told, it showed a clear change in direction for the series. Next, there's the movement. Dark Souls 2 officially introduced Natural Motion's Morpheme middleware for animations, adding dynamic movement to characters. As used in many other games of that generation, it makes the sequel markedly different to control than the first Dark Souls. Character movement speed is altered, while rolling works in multiple directions rather than 4, a change that carries over to Dark Souls 3. On balance, character motion took some getting used to, but this aspect at least did translate to newer games. Materials and lighting are a highlight. From the decayed Majula area to the oversaturated brickwork of Heidi's tower, it has an atmosphere all of its own. Dark Souls 2 is also the first of the series to really emphasize crepuscular rays, blades of light that pass by intercepting objects. A year on from release, Scholar of the First Sin also reimagined Dark Souls 2 with still newer visual features. It took the game a step further on PS4 and Xbox One. It also brought DirectX 11 support for PC, itself already kitted out with a large suite of graphics options. Overall, From Software's reputation as a PC developer improved massively with this game, and especially with the Scholar's DX11 support. Scholar of the First Sin is notable for a few other additions. It bumped the game up to 1080p and 60 frames per second on PS4 and Xbox One, leaving behind the 720p and 20 to 40 FPS performance of last gen. Bokeh depth of field was added, new objects were planted across the world, and lighting and shadows were improved. You could even see soul trails, bombs and magic light up nearby walls, making it feel more like a next-gen revision of the game. RAM budgets on next-gen machines opened up options for the team too. Each area was reimagined with a new enemy layout, meaning foes could even chase you further across the map, leading to build-ups of opponents in one spot. It was a big change. Dark Souls 2 remains an unusual direction for the series. It set the benchmark for From Software's later PC efforts. It's also the only game in the series to hit 60 FPS out of the box on newer systems, ideally when played on Pro or X hardware. Even so, in 2015, we saw an alternative soon enough. A game built exclusively for PS4 to show its next-gen tech, and a new setting altogether. Built on From Software's true next-gen engine, Bloodborne is a fan favourite. Much like Sekiro, it ditches the high fantasy setting of the Souls series, instead focusing on something new. Thrown into a gothic town of Yharnam, the game takes a very different technical direction to Scholar of the First Sin, also released in 2015. Character design takes a huge leap in quality, all Victorian waistcoats and top hats, while finely detailed enemies are decorated with fur fabrics and physics on cloth. Meanwhile, separable subsurface scattering is used for character faces, a new middleware solution, allowing for more realistic rendering of skin. Right away, this felt like a true generational leap. Next, there's the environments. Beautiful material work sets Bloodborne apart from any Souls game before it, with specular mapping adding a slick, dewy look to Yharnam City. Higher resolution normal and displacement maps adorn the opening area's cobblestone streets here, while stone walls get by through brute force of using detailed geometry. As expected, Havoc physics make a return too. Cloth simulation applies extensively across the game, to leather cloaks and fabric trailing from enemies. Meanwhile, it keeps the physics on body ragdolls, returning to the first game's style of letting enemies move after they've been downed. It's lovely stuff. As a Sony-backed project, Bloodborne is fixed to PS4 architecture. As such, a native 1920x1080 is the highest this game runs at, and the framerate cap is at 30 FPS even on Pro hardware. It's a great looking game, but there's a lot more going on over the top. A new middleware solution is added in Silicon Studios' Yebes suite of optical effects. As also seen in Final Fantasy XV, this layers extra post-process effects to enhance the image. That includes a bokeh depth of field and also lens distortion tricks. Chromatic aberration is used, mimicking an older lens by splitting detail into constituent colours towards the edges of the screen. It remains a divisive effect given how heavily it's applied, but it lends a lot to the gothic presentation of the game. Lighting again shows tricks like light shafts across the world. Curiously though, shadows take a step back from Dark Souls 2, where any flame could cast a shadow. In Bloodborne it's simplified somewhat, with a more baked in appearance. This of course wouldn't be the last we see of the engine though. Only a year later, the Bloodborne technology made its way to Xbox One and PC via a brand new game. Considered by From Software as a finale to the series, Dark Souls 3 inherits practically every trait of the Bloodborne engine. The main difference is in application. Gone are the gothic inflections, and instead the setting returns to a familiar world of knights and dragons billowing fire across courtyards. It looks beautiful, opening to a withered and ashen environment. It eventually builds to more colourful, evocative areas. A new set of materials are built to match, less slick and rain-soaked, and often drier, brighter. The technology is the same, but From Software powers it in a very different direction. There are key differences, of course. Bloodborne's chromatic aberration effect is removed this time, making the screen clearer. Even so, it keeps the per object motion blur in place behind every jump and slash, though at a different quality level for Xbox One. Major boss encounters, at least early on, also dialed down the heavy cloth physics seen in Bloodborne, in favour of transforming enemies, with a gruesome shader effect on mutated bodies. Much of the core engine work here carries straight over from Bloodborne. As a project, the most significant change is the emphasis on multi-platform development. Compared to PS4's 1080p, the Xbox One version is pushed to run at a native 900p instead, and still with a 30fps cap. PS4 Pro did receive an enhanced patch, so to speak, but simply unlocked the frame rate, while to this day Xbox One doesn't have support to go higher. The treatment of enhanced consoles is an area that thankfully sees some change with Sekiro. Overall, Dark Souls 3 may not be as great a leap as Bloodborne was, but it offers its own take on the technology a year on. The PC version also takes point here. Many of the included settings mirror what From Software offered in Dark Souls 2. With 60fps as an option, it fast became the definitive way to play. After a 3-year gap, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is finally in our hands. With the return of Souls director Hidetaka Miyazaki, the technical design here has many parallels with Bloodborne, but also key changes. Material quality for one is upgraded to support high dynamic range this time. It's a first from the studio, on console and PC, and the lead character Wolf is thrown into areas to best show it off. We start at a nighttime tutorial where fire shows HDR contrast between light and dark. Later again, we see the peak brightness pushed on the ashiner outskirts snow. Materials are much improved across the board then. There's an emphasis on high resolution alpha effects too, across an estate section, which again is a great showcase for the technology. Sekiro builds on the world streaming system too. It may have been pioneered by the Souls games, but features a key upgrade here. This time a grappling hook is at your disposal, meaning you can zoom across the stage at a rapid pace. String a few L2 taps in a row, and movement is faster than any Souls game before it. And so, with that in mind, it's crucial for the engine to render geometry and textures far ahead of the player. To minimise the sight of LOD transitions, pop-in, the game renders detail far in advance. Such a far-reaching draw distance is also essential given Sekiro's more vertical design. After all, players can take to temple rooftops as they please, where even more terrain can be taken in from a distance. It's a huge task, but the game delivers with barely any sign of LOD changes. Next, there's the lighting. Crepuscular rays are again a feature, but it's backed by a new global lighting system. Based on the sun's position, real-time environment shadows streak across the ground while outdoors, blending properly with character shadows. It's a more consistent approach. There's no baking in of shade here, and it enables shadows from tree branches to visibly move from far across the stage. While ambient occlusion has a similar dithered look under plants to previous Souls games, this at least marks a change in From Software's use of its tech. Volumetric effects also make a huge change in Sekiro. In fact, it's now an option in the PC build, a newly added preset over Dark Souls 3. What this enables is huge bursts of smoke or blood mist to envelop an area. This fills the space with a dense, rich effect that's affected by oncoming light while blending smoothly with nearby geometry and characters. Most importantly, it ties into the game's mechanics, letting wolves sneak past or distract enemies before going in for a strike. Volumetrics are taxing regardless of hardware, but it's a key point for a game focused so heavily on stealth. Sekiro's design is otherwise based on the groundwork of Bloodborne. That goes for its post-effects suite too, though clearly there's an upheaval here. Gone is the chromatic aberration, and this time we have two new additions. On top of the familiar per-object motion blur, Sekiro deploys full-screen velocity-based blur as well. It means every camera pan to a critical strike gets a high quality blur for a more filmic effect. That combines with the second part, the temporal anti-aliasing. We saw TAA in the Dark Souls remaster, and it returns again here, using data from the previous frame to clean up jagged edges. There's a lot more going on post-effects wise then, but the end result is a much cleaner presentation than From's earlier works. Physics are a long-lasting staple of the Souls series, but Sekiro has its own take. The core tenets are in here: object destruction and cloth simulation. The body ragdolls work much like Dark Souls 2 though, in that physics interactions stop after they've been downed. Then again, we see a big focus on foliage physics this time. Unlike the static foliage in Dark Souls, blades of grass are now upgraded to sway around Wolf as he crawls through. This isn't a huge change, but more a nice incremental step that makes sense given the focus on sneaking around. Last but not least, Sekiro stands out for being the first Souls game to support higher resolutions on Xbox One X and PS4 Pro. Now a locked 60fps is off the cards, and frame rates are unlocked to waver between 30 and 60 on each. What we do get though is an 1800p presentation on both machines, with signs of reconstruction on PS4 Pro. It's the first sign of proper support for the enhanced console, and by extension 4K Ultra HD displays. Full 60fps performance remains out of reach on console then, but combined with HDR, this is still a step in the right direction for the developer, in terms of final image quality. From Software clearly relishes the chance to experiment with its in-house tech, and even middleware options, to realise its worlds. Despite the progression each game makes, there's a through line, from Demon Souls right up to Sekiro 10 years on. Of course, much has changed this time. The physics, use of volumetrics and real-time shadows all tie into the gameplay. But Sekiro is still strengthened by a connection to the Souls series, a strong foundation to build on, while carving out its own place in From Software's lineup. But that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this retrospective look at how the series has evolved with time. If you did, feel free to like or subscribe, and remember to hit the bell to get notifications as any video lands. To get in touch with me or the team, just use Twitter. But for now, thanks for watching.